Did you know that Ernst Stavro Blofeld, the white cat-stroking mastermind who terrorized James Bond for over a decade, disappeared from the franchise for 34 years due to a copyright lawsuit, only to return in 2015's Spectre as one of the most disappointing villains in Bond history? Despite being portrayed by Academy Award winner Christoph Waltz and hyped as the ultimate nemesis for Daniel Craig's final outings, Blofeld's comeback was so mishandled that he barely registered as a threat in No Time to Die, reduced to a 5-minute cameo before being unceremoniously killed off by nanobots. So, how did the franchise's most iconic villain, the inspiration for Dr. Evil, the mastermind behind Spectre, and Bond's greatest recurring enemy, become such a wasted opportunity in the modern era? Today, we're exploring how copyright battles, misguided nostalgia, and a fundamental misunderstanding of Ernst Stavro Blofeld turned James Bond's arch-enemy into a footnote in his own comeback story. The creation and early dominance of Ernst Stavro Blofeld. Ernst Stavro Blofeld first appeared in Ian Fleming's 1961 novel Thunderball as a physically massive criminal mastermind, standing 6 feet 3 inches tall and weighing 280 pounds. Fleming based the character's background on real-life arms dealer Basil Zaharov and named him after cricket commentator Henry Blofeld's father, Thomas Blofeld, with whom Fleming had been acquainted at school. Fleming's literary Blofeld possessed degrees in political history, economics, engineering, and radionics from the University of Warsaw. Before founding Spectre, he worked for the Polish Ministry of Posts and Telegraphs, using his position to engage in insider trading at the Warsaw Stock Exchange. When World War II approached, Blofeld sold top-secret communications to Nazi Germany, then destroyed all records of his existence and fled to Sweden and then Turkey, where he began building his private intelligence network. The cinematic Blofeld made his debut in From Russia with Love in 1963, portrayed by Anthony Dawson's hands and Eric Pullman's voice. The character appeared only as a shadowy figure stroking a white Persian cat, with his face never shown and his name listed in credits simply as ? This approach proved brilliant. By keeping Blofeld mysterious, the films created unlimited menace in viewers' imaginations. Thunderball in 1965 continued this pattern, showing only Blofeld's lower body while he orchestrated Spectre's theft of 2 NATO atomic bombs and their ransom for £100 million in diamonds. The character's invisible presence elevated both films above standard spy adventures, creating the sense that Bond faced not just individual criminals, but a vast, sophisticated organization with unlimited reach. The Donald Pleasence problem and missed opportunities. When You Only Live Twice finally revealed Blofeld's face in 1967, Czech actor Jan Werich was originally cast in the role. Producer Harry Saltzman felt Werich was perfect, but when he arrived at Pinewood Studios, producer Albert Broccoli and director Lewis Gilbert immediately recognized a problem. Werich resembled a poor, benevolent Santa Claus rather than a menacing criminal mastermind. After 5 days of filming, they determined he lacked the necessary screen presence and recast Donald Pleasence. Pleasence's Blofeld became the definitive version, bald, scarred, and delivering lines with a calm, terrifying precision. His iconic appearance in the volcanic lair, stroking his white cat while explaining his plan to pit superpowers against each other, established visual and behavioral templates that influenced villains for decades. Mike Myers would later admit that Dr. Evil was a direct parody of Pleasence's interpretation. However, this incarnation created an unexpected problem. By fully revealing Blofeld, the films removed the mystery that had made him compelling. The character's physical appearance, particularly the facial scar and bald head, became more important than his intellectual capabilities. This shift from psychological threat to visual icon would plague future interpretations. Telly Savalas took over the role in On Her Majesty's Secret Service in 1969, bringing physical intimidation that Pleasence lacked. Standing over 6 feet tall and weighing significantly more than his predecessor, Savalas' Blofeld could believably engage Bond in hand-to-hand combat. The film also gave Blofeld his most personal victory, orchestrating the murder of Bond's wife, Tracy, minutes after their wedding ceremony. This version demonstrated how the character could evolve while maintaining core elements. Savalas played Blofeld as Count Balthasar de Bleuville, a Swiss nobleman researching genealogy while secretly planning to destroy Britain's agricultural economy using biological warfare. The performance balanced intellectual menace with physical threat, creating perhaps the most well-rounded Blofeld portrayal. the legal nightmare that destroyed a franchise icon. Blofeld's disappearance from official Bond films stemmed from Ian Fleming's collaboration with producer Kevin McClory and playwright Jack Whittingham on a screenplay called Longitude 78 West in 1958. This script, which Fleming developed into the novel Thunderball without crediting his collaborators, created one of Hollywood's most complex copyright disputes. McClory sued Fleming in 1961, claiming ownership of Thunderball's characters and concepts, including Blofeld and Spectre. The 1963 settlement granted McClory these rights in perpetuity, but allowed Eon Productions to adapt Thunderball once. This created an impossible situation. Eon could use Blofeld in their 1965 film, but couldn't develop the character further without risking legal action. The settlement's terms specified that McClory could not produce a competing Bond film until 10 years after Thunderball's release. When 1975 arrived, McClory immediately announced plans for a new adaptation. Despite numerous legal challenges from Eon and MGM, McClory eventually produced Never Say Never Again in 1983, featuring Sean Connery's return as Bond and Max von Sydow as Blofeld. Never Say Never Again earned $160 million worldwide, proving audience appetite for Blofeld, but its success created more problems than it solved. McClory continued claiming rights to the character, preventing Eon from using him in official productions. The dispute reached its peak when McClory partnered with Sony Pictures in 1997 to develop Warhead 2000 AD, another Thunderball adaptation that would have directly competed with official Bond films. Eon and MGM sued Sony, resulting in a 1999 settlement where Sony surrendered all claims to Bond-related characters. However, McClory's estate continued asserting rights until 2013, when MGM and Danjaq finally acquired full ownership of Blofeld and Spectre through a formal agreement with McClory's heirs. Charles Gray's catastrophic interpretation. Diamonds Are Forever in 1971 marked Blofeld's nadir as a compelling villain. Charles Gray's interpretation transformed the character from menacing mastermind into effete socialite, complete with affected mannerisms and theatrical dialogue delivery. This Blofeld wore elaborate costumes, including drag during the film's Las Vegas sequences, and displayed none of the intellectual superiority that defined previous versions. The film's plot reflected this diminished characterization. Rather than orchestrating complex international schemes, Blofeld's plan involved creating diamond-powered laser satellites to blackmail world governments, a concept that felt more like science fiction than spy thriller. His method of controlling these satellites through an oil rig command center suggested limited rather than global reach. Gray's performance emphasized camp over menace, treating Blofeld as an opportunity for theatrical flourishes rather than genuine threat. His delivery of lines like, "Hi there," when greeting Bond in an elevator completely undermined the character's gravitas. The filmed climax, where Bond easily infiltrates Blofeld's oil rig and defeats him through straightforward action rather than intellectual battle, confirmed that this version posed no real challenge. Most damaging was the film's treatment of Blofeld's supposed death and resurrection. The opening sequence shows Bond apparently killing a Blofeld duplicate in a mud bath, only to reveal that the real Blofeld orchestrated this deception. Rather than demonstrating Blofeld's cunning, this twist felt kind of arbitrary and confusing, suggesting that the character could return from any apparent death through unexplained means. The 34-year absence and cultural impact. Following Diamonds Are Forever, legal constraints forced Eon to write Blofeld out of the franchise entirely. The character's final official appearance came in For Your Eyes Only's pre-credit sequence, where an unnamed wheelchair-bound villain with a white cat attempts to kill Bond using a remote-controlled helicopter. Bond escapes by grabbing the villain's wheelchair with the helicopter, lifting him into the air, and dropping him down an industrial smokestack. This sequence served multiple purposes. Beyond legal necessity, it provided closure for viewers who expected consequences for Tracy's murder, demonstrated the new Bond era's rejection of Spectre-related storylines, and symbolically killed off the campy elements that had plagued Diamonds Are Forever. The villain's final plea, "I'll buy you a delicatessen in stainless steel," mocked Blofeld's grandiose nature while confirming his defeat. During his absence, Blofeld's cultural influence grew exponentially. The Austin Powers trilogy, beginning in 1997, featured Dr. Evil as a direct parody of Donald Pleasence's interpretation. Mike Myers copied Blofeld's bald appearance, facial scar, and white cat, and of course the underground lair, while exaggerating his speech patterns and megalomaniacal tendencies. Dr. Evil's popularity proved that audiences still craved the Blofeld archetype, even in comedic form. Other media adopted Blofeld-inspired villains throughout the 1980s and 90s. Inspector Gadget's Dr. Claw used similar visual elements and speech patterns, while even The Simpsons' Mr. Burns borrowed the character's corporate evil persona. These parodies and homages kept Blofeld relevant in popular culture despite his absence from official Bond films. The character's influence extended beyond entertainment into real-world discussions of corporate malfeasance and international terrorism. News media regularly described actual criminals as Blofeld-like when discussing sophisticated criminal organizations or corporate conspiracies. This cultural shorthand demonstrated just how thoroughly Fleming and the early films had embedded the archetype in public consciousness. Spectre's fundamental betrayal of the character. When Christoph Waltz was announced for Spectre in 2014, Eon Productions insisted he would play Franz Oberhauser, not Blofeld. This deception, of course, fooled nobody. The film's title, combined with previous hints about Spectre's return, made Blofeld's presence inevitable. However, this misdirection revealed deeper problems with the production's approach to the character. The film's backstory transformed Blofeld from archetypal evil into petty sibling rival, revealing that Oberhauser was Bond's adoptive brother. Jealous of the attention Bond received from Oberhauser's father Hannes, reduced cosmic villainy to family therapy material. This approach directly contradicts Fleming's characterization of Blofeld as someone motivated by power and financial gain, rather than petty personal grievance. Spectre's retroactive continuity presented even larger problems, though. The film revealed that Le Chiffre, Dominic Green, and Raoul Silva were all Spectre operatives, working under Blofeld's direction, supposedly making him responsible for every tragedy in Bond's life since Casino Royale. This retconning felt extremely forced and diminished the individual impact of previous villains, particularly Silva, whose personal vendetta against M made him compelling in Skyfall. The film's structure gave Blofeld insufficient screen time to establish his threat level. His first appearance occurs 40 minutes into the film, and he spends most of the remaining scenes explaining his motivations rather than demonstrating his capabilities. Unlike the classic Blofeld, who remained mysterious while his actions spoke for themselves, Spectre's version commits the cardinal movie sin of telling rather than showing his supposedly unlimited power. Waltz's performance, while professionally competent, lacked the menace that made previous Blofelds memorable. His interpretation emphasized intellectual smugness over genuine threat, making Blofeld feel more like a university professor than an international terrorist. The character's torturing of Bond using a mechanical chair with surgical drills represented the film's only attempt to show Blofeld's ruthlessness, but the sequence felt borrowed from other torture porn films rather than organic to the Bond universe. The Spectre meeting, missed opportunities. Spectre's Spectre meeting sequence demonstrated how the film failed to understand what made the organization compelling. Set in a Roman palazzo with dozens of attendees sitting around an enormous conference table, the scene felt more like a corporate shareholders meeting than a clandestine criminal gathering. Previous Spectre meetings, particularly in Thunderball, emphasized the organization's efficiency and ruthlessness. Members were identified only by numbers, wore identical uniforms, and faced immediate execution for failure or betrayal. The clinical atmosphere suggested an organization that valued results over personalities, making individual members disposable in the service of Spectre's larger goals. Spectre's meetings abandoned this approach entirely. Attendees wore formal evening wear, spoke openly about sensitive operations, and seemed more concerned with networking than operational security. When Blofeld executes a traitorous member by having Mr. Hinks crush his skull with his bare hands, the violence feels gratuitous rather than purposeful. The sequence also missed opportunities to establish Blofeld's leadership style. Classic Spectre meetings showed Blofeld commanding absolute respect through quiet authority and swift action. Spectre's Blofeld delivers a brief speech before disappearing, never demonstrating why dozens of international criminals would follow his orders. Most problematically, the meeting accomplishes nothing narratively. Bond infiltrates using the name Mickey Mouse, observes the skull-crushing, and escapes without gaining useful intelligence. Rather than advancing the plot or revealing character information, the sequence exists primarily to provide familiar visuals for nostalgic audiences. No Time to Die's complete waste. No Time to Die's treatment of Blofeld represented the complete abandonment of the character's potential. After building him up as Craig's ultimate nemesis, the film reduced him to a 5-minute appearance that served plot mechanics rather than character development. The film's opening sequence revealed that Blofeld had been manipulating Bond and Madeleine Swan's relationship 5 years earlier, using Spectre operative Primo to create the illusion that Swan had betrayed Bond to Blofeld. This revelation could have provided emotional weight to their confrontation, but the film rushes past it to focus on Safin's nanobots plot. Blofeld's imprisonment at Belmarsh Prison offered interesting possibilities for character development. The idea that he was orchestrating Spectre operations while feigning insanity suggested a mastermind who remained dangerous even in captivity. However, the film never explores this concept, mentioning it briefly before just moving on to the other plot points. The character's death scene perfectly encapsulated his diminished status in the Craig era. Rather than facing Bond in intellectual combat or engineering a spectacular escape attempt, Blofeld dies accidentally when Safin's nanobots infect him through Bond's touch. His final moments consist of choking while Bond watches helplessly, robbed of agency in his own demise. This death served no narrative purpose beyond clearing the deck for future films. Unlike Tracy's murder, which motivated Bond's actions in subsequent adventures, or Silva's death, which provided emotional catharsis for his vendetta against M, Blofeld's demise felt arbitrary and kind of meaningless. The film's focus on Safin instead of Blofeld revealed a fundamental misunderstanding of what audiences actually wanted. While Rami Malek delivered a competent performance, Safin lacked the iconic qualities that made Blofeld memorable. His scarred face, island lair, and poison garden felt more like generic villain elements rather than distinctive character traits. Most importantly, the modern films abandoned the patient pacing that made classic Blofeld effective. Early appearances built tension through deliberate reveals and extended conversations, allowing audiences to appreciate the character's intellect and planning abilities. The Craig-era films rushed through Blofeld scenes to accommodate modern action film pacing, never giving the character room to breathe or establish his presence. The Marvel problem: connectivity over character. Spectre's treatment of Blofeld reflected a broader trend in franchise filmmaking that prioritized connectivity over individual character development. The film's revelation that Blofeld had orchestrated previous Craig-era villains borrowed directly from Marvel's approach to shared universe storytelling, but this strategy was poorly suited to Bond's episodic structure. Marvel's success with interconnected storylines worked because the company built their universe from the ground up, introducing characters and concepts gradually over multiple films. Each villain served specific narrative functions while contributing to larger storylines, and audiences understood that they were watching chapters in a much larger, much bigger story. Bond films traditionally operated differently, presenting standalone adventures that occasionally referenced previous events. This episodic structure allowed each film to focus entirely on its individual villain without worrying about larger continuity concerns. Audiences expected complete stories rather than chapters in ongoing sagas. By retrofitting Blofeld as the mastermind behind unrelated villains, Spectre diminished both the character and his supposed operatives. Le Chiffre's gambling addiction, Green's environmental obsessions, and Silva's vendetta against M became less interesting when revealed as assignments from a higher authority rather than their own personal motivations. This approach also created logical problems that the film never addressed. If Blofeld controlled Silva, why did he allow Silva to kill M when he supposedly wanted to manipulate Bond? If he orchestrated Vesper's death, why didn't he ensure that Bond would die as well? The retroactive continuity raised more questions than it actually answered. The tragedy of modern Blofeld isn't just that he was poorly handled. It's that his failure represents everything wrong with contemporary franchise filmmaking's relationship with its own history. Rather than understanding what made classic characters work, studios too often mistake surface elements for substance, delivering hollow recreations that satisfy no one. James Bond will undoubtedly continue, and perhaps future films will find better ways to honor the franchise's legacy while creating genuinely new threats. But the Blofeld debacle serves as a cautionary tale about the dangers of nostalgia without understanding and the importance of respecting what made beloved characters beloved in the first place. But hey, that's just our opinion. What other classic villains do you think deserve better treatment in modern adaptations? Let us know in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more deep dives into how Hollywood handles its most iconic characters. This video is made by movie fans for movie fans.